Welcome back. Up next, we have a panel conversation. It's talking about focusing on well-being to evolve your employee value proposition. So we all know that the elements of worker well-being are not static. They change over time. As a game that moves as you play, societal changes, and younger employees arriving with new identities, new values, and new expectations. Employers need to keep in touch with worker needs and continuously reimagine the benefits they're offering, as well as the things that contribute to well-being and fulfillment, like inclusion, recognition, and feedback. So this panel of experts will have lots of ideas and practical tips on this issue. Moderating the discussion will be Cynthia Barnes. Cynthia is a Denver-based freelance journalist, and her work has appeared in National Geographic, 5280, the Boston Globe, the Denver Post, and many other publications. She loves dives, both scuba and bars, baseball, and planning her next adventure. So please welcome Cynthia and this panel of leaders.
Good afternoon. We have a very esteemed panel of experts here with a diverse range of experience. And I'd like to ask you to briefly introduce yourselves and then share one key component of what you think is most important to foster well-being for your employees and help them to thrive. So if we could start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cynthia. Good afternoon. It's good to be here. My name is Kenneth Smith. I lead HR for our corporate functions at Vail Resorts, and I have the pleasure, or maybe the dishonor, of having to follow my boss who went this morning. So, so I'm excited to be here and talk to you all a little bit about well-being. One of the things that I think is one of the most critical components of well-being is empathy. And I think that it's important for us as leaders to understand our people. And that is a pathway to empathy, which only comes from really paying attention to them and noticing them. And so I'll talk more about that maybe throughout the course of this conversation, but I think empathy, which can only come by noticing and paying attention to your people, is a good and critical component to understanding well-being.
Well, that was a good answer, so thank you very much. My name is Donald Dees, and I'm an HR business partner for EW Scripps broadcasting company. For those of you that are in Denver, one of our stations there, KMGH, if you're familiar with it. If you're in Colorado Springs, KOAA News 5 there. We own those two stations in this state. For me, I would think that psychological safety is a key component for employee wellness. We have a different group of employees that are coming in to the workforce now, and providing some psychological safety for those employees coming in, I think, is critical to how we move them through the process of their personal and professional development. Great. So that would be my response to that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jill Kahn. I work for Discover Financial Services. I have the privilege of leading our talent management, talent development, and culture functions. For me, it's a combination of what these two gentlemen have already stated. I think listening to employees and understanding what their needs are, however an organization does that, is so essential to getting for us to be able to deliver what they need. And the most important part of that listening piece is actually taking action. And so, along with helping leaders have empathy and psychological safety, which, I mean, I completely agree with you, took my answer. Thank you very much, Kenneth. But being able to listen to your employees and understand what they need and deliver that for them.
I'm Melissa Doman. I'm an organizational psychologist and former therapist. I'm analyzing every one of you. I teach businesses these skills on how to talk about mental health at work and not just say mental health at work is important. And I also have the privilege of serving as the mental health at work advisor to BetterHelp Business. Oh, and my most important question. See, I already screwed up. I feel that one of the most pivotal things to employee well-being at work is actually giving people the words and the skills to talk about mental well-being at work. In between the moments of using the EAP, please use your EAP, and going to therapy, going to the doctor, to be able to have these conversations with the people they spend the most time with every single week. And so not knowing how to have the conversation is no longer a barrier. So I think building the skills is what's most important to foster mental well-being at work.
It's always the most fun to go last and have
You're
to
gonna
come
do
up
great.
with something new. I'm Marissa Carson. I'm also an organizational psychologist and have the pleasure of leading the talent management and org effectiveness function at Elevance Health. I will add to what everyone has said, but take a slightly different approach, which is I think well-being is not just about kind of how we're feeling in the moment, but how we feel about our prospects for the future. And I think as leaders and companies, we have an opportunity to create well-being through challenge and growth, and providing opportunities for employees to diversify and build new skills so they can continue to see themselves growing and adding to the organization and enriching their own life in new and different ways.
Great. Kenneth, we'll start with you, and then I hope that everyone will chime in. Your company added inclusion to its values and mission statement in 2022. And if you could share with how that actually plays out day to day, and also how you see it growing as your employees change generationally and in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, sure, Cynthia. Happy to get us started. So one of the things, if you all were here this morning, and Linan talked a little bit about this strategy that's core to our company, which is explore, grow, and belong. And when you think about the idea of our inclusion at Vail Resorts, one of the things that's so important to us is that we really, even though it's said in order explore, grow, belong, you say explore first, then grow, then belong, the truth of the matter is that it really starts with belonging. And when you think about well-being and you think about the importance of inclusion, you have to start by understanding and making sure your employees feel like they belong. And the way that you do that is by getting to know them. I talked about this in my opening remarks. When I think about well-being, the thing about it that's so nuanced is that well-being is very personal. Every single person needs something very individualized and unique in order for them to feel like they belong and that they're included. And that is part and parcel to making sure that they have and feel like they have the ability to feel like they're connected to the organization. At Vail Resorts, when we went on this journey of introducing this competency, it was really important for us to make certain that we started with the concept of belonging by institutionalizing some really critical components and competencies for our leaders so that they can grow in their understanding of what it means to belong, and then they can lead in that way for the entirety of the organization. It shows up in everything that we do, not just in leadership competencies, but also in the businesses that we're trying to run. So if we're trying to stand up a business on our mountain or one of our resorts, we always start with what is it that is most important to those communities, and how are we going to help our employees connect with that community so that they can in turn deliver that experience to our guests and ultimately make certain that they are advancing the imperatives and objectives of the company.
Could you give a specific example of that? Because I'm thinking that 20 years ago, you couldn't apply for a job at Vail unless you had grown up on skis.
Absolutely.
But is there anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So now at Vail Resorts, that was at some point in time, you would think that in order to work at Vail, you had to be someone who's a skier or a snowboarder. Actually, a skier. Forget about snowboarding. Let's go even further. I know Cynthia's a snowboarder. That's why I'm poking fun at her. But you're right. There is an evolution that has to take place, because when you think about this concept, we had to change the mindset of our leaders so that our leaders can start to think about, hey, it's not so much about the ability for them to be able to ski and snowboard, because as our founders of our company stated, anyone that's on skis today or on a snowboard today all started as a beginner. And they all at some point were not a skier. They were all new to the sport. And so we bring that mindset to our employees now so that as they think about hiring, as they think about talent that needs to work at, that we want to have work at Vail Resorts, we think about them from a capability perspective and what skills can they bring, agnostic of whether they ski or not, and figure out how that can actually be a way that they can draw people into the industry because they have a beginner's mindset, so that they can create connection for folks that would otherwise not feel like they belong within our company.
Thank you. And before, I would love for anyone to chime in. Can you guys see, or am I blocking you completely? You good? Okay. Yes, any other thoughts?
Okay, my only thought for the day. Just one per day. So I think you started off that with inclusion, right? So when you have employees that you want to make feel included, you have to reach beyond just that industry spectrum. So in this case, skiing, snowboarding, skiing, that type of thing, and take a look at that individual and see where they could fit into your organization, right? Because we have all kinds of different people that we have in our coffers today. And so how do we make each and every one of them feel that they are a part of your process? And not just I'm gonna pick on Vail for a second because you started the conversation. But how do they feel a part of your industry? How do you make people feel not just included, but how do you make them start off by making them feel welcomed, right? We all have a process in here, all HR, so we have a process called onboarding, right? Everybody does it. So how do you start there to making that individual feel that they're included? Not just physically included, but how are they mentally included? What things are important to them that fits within your organization? And all of us can find something in our organization that each and every one of us fit into. It may not be something big, it may be something small, but a lot of times that's all someone needs to feel included, that they're heard and their voices are a part of that process that you have for them. So that's my one thought for today.
I'd like to just a couple of tactical things that that show up at Discover. From an inclusion perspective, like just recently, we're focused on disabilities, and we've just now started having ASL folks at our company town halls that are signing for folks that are hard of hearing. Also, we have a neurodiverse pocket that we've been doing and looking at neurodiverse candidates and how we get them into the organization. And so there's some tactical things, I think, from an inclusion perspective, because a lot of what, to both of these gentlemen's points, a lot of what happens is there's a lot of things that are completely invisible to us. And without getting to know someone, and without understanding like that they have low vision, or something else is keeping them from doing something or making it easier on them, right? We have to figure what out those things are and then start taking tactical things to help those folks. And we do it both from an internal employee perspective and an external perspective as well. So it's been something that's been really amazing for us to start lately.
Great.
I'd love to add to that if that's okay.
Okay, well, next question was for you, but please.
I'm making it easier for you.
All right. We could probably talk about this one question.
Yeah, I'll be very succinct, I promise.
Yeah.
I want to build on what all three of you said, because for mental well-being, for example, medically speaking, we all have mental health. Animals have mental health. It's our baseline social, emotional, and cognitive functioning. I think a huge miss that the workplace is unfortunately doing is that when you have these things like a Wellness Wednesday or something to bring people together, it does not take into account people's experiences of mental health. It doesn't matter that you work for the same company. It doesn't matter that you stand on the same soil. The odds of you having identical feelings or biases or assumptions or experiences about mental health is near zero. It is near zero. So I think a huge part of inclusion is when you're asking people to come to this inclusive conversation, this conversation table, you have to ask, well, what are you bringing to the table? So we can understand how do you bridge a potential divide of differences and even find out what those similarities are, because I think you can't just do this one mental health lens on a very non-binary sort of topic.
Well, and Jill, when you said low vision, I feel seen. And that was actually, you led into the question I was going to ask you first. How do you create an evergreen culture
Yeah.
around well-being instead of it's Mental Health Monday or it's Mental Health Week. And you two are organizational psychologists, if you would go first.
Yeah. So I do strongly feel that doing something is better than nothing. And so talking about mental health on World Mental Health Day, which is October 10th, in case anybody doesn't know, it's coming up, or Mental Health Awareness Month in May. Better than nothing. But what about all the other days in the year when life is still happening, problems are still happening, people are bringing it into a virtual office and an in-person office? And so I think that to create an evergreen culture around mental well-being at work, it doesn't mean that every single day you have a conversation, it's always about this, always about this. I do feel, though, that there needs to be consistent messaging and consistent training and consistent, like, that recency effect, because if people aren't realizing it is a conversation and a skill that is needed all year round, then it's only paid that checkbox tax about twice a year. And so I think that the way to do that is to, not to sound cliche, but to actually walk the walk, to not put on the website or in the onboarding messaging. We care about mental health in our organization, and then these new employees hear about it one day a year. So it's here are these trainings that are available once a quarter. Here are the different programming, that we've actually implemented into our organization. Here's what good looks like. Here are the metrics that we've put. It is a very abstract topic, but the implementation doesn't have to be. And so I would encourage all of you to look at that evergreen culture of mental health at work really as something that runs parallel to any other form of professional development. Because if it is seen as this optional wellness endeavor, people will treat it as such, and it'll only come up a couple times a year.
Marissa, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll build on that and add it. I think especially in large organizations, but in any size organization, your ability to scale the impact, the meaningful impact of this work is through the people who are touching employees every day. And that tends to be managers. For those of us who manage teams, we feel the weight of that, or we should, because it's important that if you're interacting with your team members every day, you are not only responsible for helping to drive high performance, but to do that with a lens for what's going to get them excited and help them to contribute at their best. How their mental health may be ebbing and flowing, which may have a bearing on how they're showing up at work and engaging with others. And so I think it's not just, it's an and, it is training people in our organizations. And I would be very acutely focused, and have done this work in our companies, to be very acutely focused on managers who in that much more personalized way are engaging, or should be, daily, weekly with their teams, and should be listening, demonstrating empathy, and bringing to life the behaviors that we're asking of them to help cultivate well-being in the workplace.
Great. Donald, you spoke earlier about having a strong value proposition for employees, for attracting and maybe even more importantly, retaining talent. And how do you see this fitting in as a value proposition for the well-being of your team? And then anyone else who wants to chime in.
Well, I'll tell you, so every company has their own value proposition for what should attract employees to make them want to stay there, right? So one of the things at EW Scripts is our benefits packet for employees. And when I say benefits, I don't simply mean the medical, dental, and vision, so everyone has that, right? So what other things do you have? We have counseling capabilities that's free for our employees. We have different activities that keeps them physically in shape, and we assess points to that in order to provide them financially per quarter for staying healthy. Because what's one of the largest expenses that companies has other than salaries, right, are those medical costs that they pay behind the scene, behind your monthly medical. So those types of things where we have a few programs, one's through Virgin Pulse and others through Magellan, through ACO that we partner with financially. And so we have a number of programs that employees get to engage with that benefits them on some type of personal level, other than just the professional level. So that value proposition is what gains our employees there. And quite frankly, have employees staying with us for 30 years. We just had one individual that retired from 40 years with the company. And so having employees stay, as you all know, past 2 years is like a major accomplishment, right? So what does your company have as a value proposition for the new crop of employees coming on today that makes them want to work and stay there in your environment? And I think we have some pretty good things that attract employees beyond just the pay. It has to be more. It has to be more than just pay that gets them to stay there, I believe.
Culture.
Building on that, and something we're all wrestling with, and I don't know that anyone's cracked this yet, is where you work as part of a benefit. And this looks different by industry and by company. There are different constraints. But employees today are more and more interested and even concerned with having the ability to have some flexibility and even autonomy, which I think is even more important than flexibility. I'd like to dictate where and how I'm working to the extent that it's possible within the constraints of our environment and the work that needs to be done. And so I think factoring some of that, and organizations, ours included, are actively doing that, trying to factor flexibility and autonomy as a benefit into packages for employees, while also being mindful of employees who really want to have deep connections and meet people and work with people. And so we're kind of caught in a little bit of that catch-22. I think balancing that and really intentionally building it into how we think about benefits packages is an important next frontier.
I'd love to add to what you're saying. So please forgive me, I'm gonna nerd out just for a minute. There is something called the SCARF model. Not like the gorgeous scarf you wear. The SCARF model from David Rock. Show of hands who has not heard of that. SCARF model from David Rock. I know you don't want it, but that's your homework. So I highly encourage you, especially thinking about well-being, inclusion, all these sorts of things, and what you were also mentioning about autonomy, that's the A in SCARF. So I think that's a really good model and framework to put into programs you're thinking about to see what motivates people at work, if it's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, or fairness, and really ranking what those are. Whenever I work with companies and workshops, I say it's time to rank your SCARF. Because if you're finding that people are not aware of what that is, it's kind of hard to get those needs met if they're pissed off and they don't know why. Then if you get this model as a framework, it's an amazing team tool, really good for development programs, and a nice little bolt-on is a framework in terms of how you look at making sure those needs get met.
Thank you. Jill, I was going to say, I thought that the F, instead of fairness, would be finance.
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
Because finance...
Also important.
So financial well-being, it's hard to have well-being in other areas when you don't know where rent is coming from. How do you build that in? How do you make that a component, and what kind of tools can you offer?
I mean, being a financial services company, for us, this is really important. We have a financial literacy program for folks, which they can go access and learn about budgeting, debt management, things like that. But there's also two other components that I don't think people always think about from a financial wellness perspective. One is about career growth. So we invest in our employees in multiple ways. We have a college start program where you could go, we will pay for your college 100% in 3 categories. We'll also add educational assistance if you want to get a degree in another category. We have a certification program and also a graduate piece as well that we'll pay up to $10,000 for. So that, in helping people invest in themselves and move up, is a piece of that for us, as well as just from a benefits perspective, like what's your 401k look like, how much does the company give to that employee over the course of the year, how does that support them, and also like employee stock purchase program. That's another thing that we do from a financial perspective. But it is a huge focus for us, especially because at Discover we have kind of like 2 groups of individuals. We have 10,000 people that are on the phone answering customer phone calls, And then we have a whole group of people that sit at the headquarters. So that looks different for those two groups of people as well. And so we really have to think about what those two groups need in order to serve that for them.
Does anyone else have thoughts on financial well-being?
Sure, I'll build on that. Similar to what Discover does, Vail has done some similar things as it relates to what we do for our employees. Epic Promise is our foundation where we provide benefits to employees on two fronts. One of the ways we do that is if they have hard times, or you think about the Boulder fires and things of that nature, we were able to provide assistance to employees that were in need through that program, as well as for those who have, as employees are going back to school, or if they have children that are dependents that are attending school, we offer scholarships through the Epic Promise Foundation. So similarly, this idea of financial well-being being really important to your overall well-being is important. And then the other thing we do and offer is we think about the Epic service, and Linnea talked about this a little bit this morning, but our Epic service development programs, both for summer and for our leaders, is a way and a path for them to build their careers at Vail Resorts, which is so important, right? Because it gives them an opportunity to not only understand where the opportunities are, but to build the skills that are necessary in order for them to grow and explore and ultimately feel that sense of belonging at Vail Resorts. One of the things I live by as an HR professional was shared with me a few companies ago that is so important to me. Any HR professional would probably want to hang on to this. But our leaders said that our job as HR professionals, they said that every day our employees come to work, they're sent to work by their loved ones. And our job as HR professionals and as leaders is to return them to their loved ones in at least as good a position, if not a better position than they were when they came to the company.
In one piece, hopefully.
Exactly. And so I think that's important, right?
That's a good.
And so I try and live by that, and I think that in any company that we have the opportunity and honor of serving, that we should try and embody that, because I think it's the highest order of leadership, especially as HR leaders.
If I could just get a free ski pass, my financial well-being.
I knew that was coming. She's an icon pass holder, so we've got to work on that.
I would add quickly, and it'd be remiss, I was at TIAA until a few months ago, so I would be remiss in not adding retirement readiness and well-being, and you mentioned it, but what we know is people are living longer, and particularly women and people of color are investing less in retirement. And so really thinking about helping our employees not only be prepared for today, but prepared for tomorrow, and positioning them to be prepared for tomorrow, I think is a really powerful benefit and a powerful focus as well.
Yeah.
I'd love to add to what you were saying, because I think that, so my husband and I lived in the UK for 3 years, and a term that I came to attach to very distinctly is duty of care. Organizational duty of care to employees is taken very, very, very seriously in Europe and the UK, and in many companies in the United States, but I would not say it's a uniform expectation throughout the United States, where that duty of care is not just make sure they go home in one literal piece, but also one mental piece, one financial piece, you know, making sure that the people who work so hard to produce the outcome, to put the service to the market, whatever it is, that there's some basic duty of care for general health and well-being, and making sure that they have not only a physically safe environment, but a psychologically safe environment, not a hostile work environment, making sure they get access to the benefits they need, not having those barriers. And I think that duty of care is something that the United States could serve to honor more.
Absolutely. Marissa, you were talking about career well-being, which all of these things fall in, but about opportunities for growth and advancement and balance. And how do you see that?
Yep. Jill touched on this a bit briefly as well. I would, as we think about well-being, I think one of the neglected components is often how I'm building and maintaining and growing my career. I will borrow a bit from Simon Sinek and highlight two things that are important. We know are important to people at work. One is mastery. I have a feeling that I'm doing something that I'm good at and I can add value. The second being purpose, mastery and purpose. I have worth through the work that I'm doing, and I add value through that work. I have the opportunity to contribute meaningfully. I think creating situations that foster that sense of mastery and purpose for our employees. And I'll add the third then, which is creating pathways, the ability to see yourself take that and grow. And that looks very different. For some, it might be about escalating the ranks and finding new leadership experiences and opportunities. For others, it might be delving into expertise, leaning into being an individual contributor in different ways. For some, it might be really getting comfortable where you are and continuing to contribute meaningfully in a similar role or the same role for long periods of time. But I think understanding those aspirations and those motivations and then being able to tap into them is going to be, it is and will continue to be an important piece of well-being at work. And I touched on it already, but I think it's another area that managers play a critical role, both in understanding and then helping to tap into those aspirations of their associates. And then organizationally and systemically, we have a responsibility to create those ecosystems that support internal mobility. How many companies do you have leaders sitting in business A and leaders sitting in business B who are like, don't poach my employees? That person just left to that division and they're devastated to see them go, when the culture I would like to see us foster and that we've worked hard to cultivate is around celebrating those types of moves.
Can I just add one other thing?
Yes, and the next question is
I don't think
for
you can underscore enough the importance of purpose at work, for an employee to feel purpose at work. Just to share an example, Discover's currently in the possible position of being bought by Capital One. And in one of our most recent employee engagement surveys, this has risen as a huge theme of the organization has been very focused on a risk culture, and everyone feels that, and it's not part of their day-to-day job or what they got hired for. And so we can see that kind of rising up as they are missing this like mastery, purpose. I love what I'm doing. I get excited about what I'm doing. I just don't think you can underscore the importance of that enough from a well-being perspective, because if people are not engaged in the work that they're doing, then that just starts to degrade their desire to be at the job, their desire to do well, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Go ahead.
It's very brief. I love that you're saying that, because I think that when you think about purpose, mastery, and you're mentioning this too, that if you think about fostering mental well-being at work and you go down to the most basic levels, we're all animals that can talk, right? I mean, I want to admit it, but we are. And if you think about these wonderful things like inclusion, financial literacy, mastery, all these wonderful things that go along the side of the reward on the threat reward model. So if you're thinking about things where you want employees to have a sense of reward, whether it's intrinsic, whether it's extrinsic, versus having other things that can create an inherent sense of threat, even if you don't want to, like not fostering inclusion, not trying to have people focus on purpose, not enabling conversations. These all create these unintentional threat responses, which can be lower productivity, employee attrition, all these things that you love managing in HR. So if you just think about, not to again, geek out on you, but I'm, alas, a geek. If you think about really the neuroscience aspect as well of employee well-being and mental health, every behavior has a cause, and if you're thinking about how you can strategically impact that, I would encourage you all to ask me any other nerd questions you want after the panel. I'm happy to help.
Thank you. Jill, speaking of safety, and you must have looked at my notes, because with all the transformations, like your company possibly being sold, with layoffs and everything, and all of the organizational change that's just a part of modern business, how do you foster that sense of well-being when employees are very rightfully and very logically possibly terrified?
I think about this from an air, water, food perspective, right? The thing that employees worry the most about when something like this is on the table, whether it's a transformation and they know that jobs are going to be lost or your company might be getting bought, is really like, am I going to have a job? What's going to happen next? If this company buys this, am I going to have benefits? It's just like communicate, communicate, communicate. When the merger was announced at Discover, it was on President's Day. We were not at work. The company did not send out a note. And everyone found out via some social media or a friend calling them or a text message from someone at work. And I cannot, oh my gosh, we just,
my stomach hurts for
if you could screw up that, I mean, like, it was leaked and, you know, there's a whole lot of things behind that. But needless to say, like, to recover from something like that with employees, you completely lost trust. We didn't send anything out that day, you know. So for me, AIR, right? Communicate, communicate, communicate. Even if you can't communicate anything, still communicate that you can't communicate anything. Like, we don't have the answer to that yet. We're working on it, right? Here's what we do have the answer to. Here's what we do know what's going to happen next, right? And of course, no one knows if you're going to have a job or not. I don't know if I'm going to have a job or not in 4 months, right? Like, we'll see what happens. But the other thing is just leaning into supporting employees. We've launched 2 programs at Discover since the merger was announced. One's called Excelling Throughout Transformation. One was called Leading Through Ambiguity. It was like, the first one was for leaders. So we taught leaders, like, how do you just sit with what people are dealing with right now? Like, how do you just sit with that? How do you talk to them about it? Everybody's somewhere on that change curve, right? Some people are like, this isn't gonna happen. Some people are ticked off. Some people are like, oh my God, my life is over. You know, lots of different places, but you have to meet those people where they are. And so that was our first order of business. Like, within 3 weeks of that being announced, we were out there saying, like, here's how you talk about this. And then now we've got a program running right now for all different levels of the organization, because each level of an organization is dealing with something different. And so you really, again, you have to meet people where they're at and help them, you know, understand what's in their control, understand what's out of their control, how do they still focus on their work, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I've been living this real time for the last, 9 months.
And I love how this weaves together, because my next question, and Kenneth, I was going to start with you. Some leader made the decision to send that out and have that happen. And when you're talking about well-being, it possibly doesn't matter if you're not training leaders. Like, don't do that. How do you go about starting at the top so that those kind of very preventable things that threaten workers and team members' well-beings don't happen?
Yeah, I would say start with this truth. We're all human beings, and we're not going to get it right all the time. But when we don't get it right, we have to be quick to recover, which is exactly what Jill explained. I think that's the most important thing, is that we're not going to get it right all the time. Sometimes we're going to get out ahead of our skis, no pun intended. And in that case, we have to be ready to recover very quickly. And I think it goes back to the role of the leader, which your question is, how do you start at the top? I think it's really important for us to over-invest in leadership. People talk about it all the time, but it's so important because the leader is the person that sits in the seat that understands the dynamics and what it means to have well-being at work, right, with their employee base. And so I think it's important for the leader to have as much investment as possible so that they are equipped to respond in an agile way when situations like this arise. Yeah. And then as it relates to thinking about how do we start at the top, I don't think that there's a situation where we always start at the top, Cynthia. I think sometimes we do have to learn from the folks that are at the front line because they know best exactly what their experiences are. And we learn there and we build up. And there are things that we can continue to invest in and teach right at the top level. But I think that it's more of a teaching at the top as well as the bottom so that together you can get to the right balance of where you need to be in order to drive the right experience for your employees and ensure their well-being, especially in times like this.
Yeah. Across matters a lot too. I think one of the pieces, people are looking for what's being said and what's not being said.
Yes.
And what's different between messages that are being shared by different leaders. Yeah. So if we haven't been really intentional about aligning messages in an authentic way at the top and then being able to communicate as an aligned front, those cracks seep through all levels of the organization very quickly.
So true.
Yeah.
We have 5 minutes left, so I'd like to have one more question, start with Donald, and then just do a brief wrap up. Employees have different needs for wellness at different times. Someone may never need family leave, or they might need it for an aging parent, or a ski injury, and different generations.
Hopefully not.
We're talking a lot about skiing.
Different. Well, the season is almost here.
It is.
How do you match those wellness needs of different generations, different circumstances for your employees when it comes to wellness?
Good question.
So I would say that you're using the right word, and that is different. We call it individual needs. And so every individual is exactly that, an individual. So, but to have a process in place for some of those common needs, so when someone has a need to provide home health care or family care for a loved one or pet care, right? Because that's a real thing, whether we like to acknowledge it or not, it is. And so how do you have a process in place to kind of have those things in a compartmentalized fashion? So as someone needs to go out because of an injury and they need to go and maybe go through FMLA, or they have some ADA issues that are coming up that you have to contend with, what's your process for that? And what's your process for those that have a death in the family with bereavement? What's your process for those that are, like I said, taking care of a loved one at home? I'm a big believer, I'm ex-military, so from a veteran standpoint, we build things through processes, right? Processes. And you can't build one for every situation, but you can put some things in place, I believe, that will capture, or at least have you ready, for the most part, to capture those individual situations. But every individual is exactly that. So providing that specialized care to that individual one-on-one when they come to you, or they come to their manager and their manager comes to you, it's so important. I'm telling you, when people see that you actually are engaging them individually, then you're building brand loyalty for your company, because they'd say that my company cares about me and my situation, no matter how large or small you are. So I would say that you put some processes in place ahead of time, and that way when these scenarios present themselves, you have an action plan for it, and you can always tweak that action plan to accommodate the individual needs.
I'd love to add
And does anyone else have thoughts on how you balance that individuality with fairness? Because I am a freelancer, but I was once told, well, so-and-so has a soccer game. And I'm like, and I have a happy hour. and so that, I do think that could be a challenge, how you treat employees fairly, and yet also recognizing their individual needs.
And just before the rest of the panel jump in, I just want to say one last thing on this, and that is on your word fairness. Just be careful you don't associate the word fairness with equality, because they're two different things, right? So because you treat someone in a specific fashion because of their situation, doesn't mean the next person get that same treatment with a different scenario, right? So fairness, yes. Sometimes that word equality is what people equates to fairness. Okay, so I'll leave that.
Other thoughts? We have 1 minute.
I'd love to add very quickly. So I think something so critical about what you're saying is that there's certain types of leave, for example, that people are terrified to take because of how their company may react or what they may say, what they may imply about their performance. For example, going on short-term disability for mental illness or other sorts of emotional struggles. I cannot tell you the number of people who would never pardon the information, over their dead body, ask their company for that, to literally go off work to help themselves so they can function better, so they can come back to work. So I think normalizing that we don't be scared, not to abuse asking for leave, but don't be scared if you need this leave for like functioning reasons. I have a family member currently who's a senior leader in their business who had the courage to go to their company to ask for short-term disability leave for 3 months and talk about role modeling. So I think that is just don't, make sure the messaging around taking leave is just as important as the policy and the procedure.
Absolutely.
And don't underestimate the importance of happy hour.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I know that you'll be around. I'm sure people will want to ask some questions, but really appreciate you joining us here.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Thanks, everybody.